Hello, my name is Austin Belzer, and welcome back to the Austin B Media podcast. Today, I'm going to be discussing I Used to Be Funny with the longest running podcast guest I've had, Alise Chaffins. I probably got that wrong again, but it's your fourth time here. Which ones have we done together? Barbie spoiler, Envy season one, and we didn't do the boys season four like we were going to.
No, we
That was
talked
just a
about it.
scheduling issue.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think this makes four. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Oh, and Ted Lasso. So
oh,
five timers club,
Ted Lasso five
baby.
times. So yeah, go buy our book, The Ted Lasso Guide to Relationships. I have a link to it on my website. Just search Ted Lasso podcast discussion. I'll link all of the um, times she's been on the podcast here before. I don't have a special purple jacket SNL style, but so all I can offer is a welcome back to the podcast.
That works.
Yeah, that's all I can offer. I don't got much. But so for those listening or watching who somehow don't know of you by now, let's catch people up on what you've been working on recently. I know you published what was it, Beetlejuice review this morning?
Yeah. Yeah. Just recently did that. I usually have two reviews a week. I write for a newspaper in Morgantown, West Virginia. And like my website, my Substack is MacGuffin or Meaning. And I can just find that at alisechaffins.substack.com. But yeah, regular updates at least twice a week and maybe a little more than that, depending on if we're in like film festival times. Or I just happened to see an extra thing that I really love and had to write about. So
And speaking of, you know how we start? We always start with a recommendation. What is something you've either seen, listened to, what have you, or even read recently that you'd really
yeah.
recommend?
So I'm gonna recommend an upcoming thing coming to Apple TV. Disclaimer is
Ooh,
phenomenal.
yeah.
I have a review of that on my site. It is excellent. It comes out October 11th. Definitely check it out. It's really, really great. Kate Blanchett, Kevin Kline, Sasha uh, Baron Cohen. I mean, it's really excellent. Like all phenomenal performances. Yeah, great limited series. So
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that directed by Alfonso Cuarón?
yeah,
Yeah.
it is Children of Men. So like excellent. It looks fantastic. Like it's just really, really well done. So it's probably my top recommend. And also, I just finished The Penguin last night. That comes out on HBO and Max in a couple of
September
weeks. I think
19th.
on the 19th. Yeah. So I can't say anything about it quite yet. Tomorrow, I will have some thoughts about that show, though.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know if I've talked about this on the other podcast I just had with Max Vincent. When was that? That was for Deadpool and Wolverine. That was for Deadpool and
Yeah,
Wolverine.
yeah.
But in case I haven't already recommended it, I would recommend a Disney Plus doc people aren't talking about. It's a National Geographic documentary called Billy and Molly, the real life otter story or something like that. I think it's just called Billy and Molly or something like that. But it's like how it sounds. A guy named Billy from Shetland who can't have kids of his own. Some one day a baby otter, river otter, just pushes up on his little like porch thing, his little dock he has by his. He has a seaside cabin with
Mm.
his wife. Um, and it just washes up there, no sign of the mother. And it's about him caring for him, for the otter named Molly, um, over the years and what the relationship is to each other, whether and it questions whether or not the relationship is good for one another, mentally, physically, every sense of the term. It's probably one of the better Nat Geo docs I've seen recently. Now, granted, Nat Geo docs are amazing, but this one just blew me out of the water. I just happened to open Disney Plus, and I was like, you know what? I really want to catch up with this one, and it did not disappoint. And for those who don't know my high bar of documentaries, this surpasses the bar. Like I've
Ooh,
really
yeah.
watched some really bad documentaries this year that I'll be talking about, but I highly recommend it. I think I rated it 5 stars on Letterbox.
Nice.
and I'll have an exclusive review for patrons near the end of the month. I think September 26th is what I'm aiming for. Um, so look out for that. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And speaking of, let's talk about our movie
Yeah.
today, which is I Used to Be Funny, which stars Rachel Sennott. I think she's the only star that really you can even mention because it's so much focused about her.
Yeah,
Um,
Jason Jones is of some note since he was on The Daily Show for a really long time. Um, for some maybe older people, because he's probably not been on it for a minute, but he was one of the correspondents back in the day. So,
got it.
yeah.
And I do really quick want to issue, before we get into our discussion, a real quick trigger warning for anyone who's dealt with um, violence, anyone suffering from PTSD, sexual abuse, any of those things. I really want to just kind of make sure we talk about that before we get
Mhm.
into it, because we are going to talk about that specifically when we get into the spoiler session of the movie. But yeah, this film has heavy, heavy themes. I think depression is one of them, PTSD is one of them, but there's a lot of intense themes. So if that's something that may be potentially triggering for you, just turn it off and turn this podcast off. Maybe go listen to my Deadpool and Wolverine discussion,
There you go.
or one of our discussions with Barbie, or Gen V season one. Maybe we'll do a Gen V season two, a discussion in 2027. I don't know. It depends on when that comes out. But yeah, look towards the more lighthearted ones because I've got plenty out there.
For sure.
But this is going to be a pretty serious, and I don't want to say sobering discussion, but that tends to
Mm,
be the first word that pops in my mind when
yeah.
discussing this movie. So, with that said, let's get into our discussion of I Used to Be Funny. First, I want to talk about Rachel Sennott's performance because she's doing something different here, at least in terms of the roles I've seen her in. You know, bottoms
Mhm.
are the two that come to my mind, but I'm sure
Right.
there's more I'm not thinking of where she's inherently more comedic. And yes, I know the title is I Used to Be Funny. So there's that funny in the title, and there are comedic bits where
Oh, for
uh,
sure.
that side of Rachel comes out. But this is a much more serious movie, I would say. So do you feel that that shift to a more dramatic tone was effective for her, particularly when we're talking about her friends' intentions and trying to communicate that to her friends who may not understand what she's going through?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll be honest, the comedian does dramatic role is often some of my favorite. Like, that's not a genre of movie, but it kind of could be. Like, my one of my favorite Will Ferrell movies is, the fiction one, and all of a sudden my brain just went
Truer than
out.
fiction, something like that.
Yeah, something. But like that one, Truman Show. And I mean, we saw Robin Williams do tons of these kind of movies. And like I think there's just something in that shift between comedy. I think the line between comedy and drama is just really thin. And sometimes they can be just like those kind of actors can be really effective in these darker kind of roles, and I think
Hmm.
she does a really fantastic job. I think a lot of times you see that like later in comedians careers, and obviously this is a much younger woman, but I think that she handles it really really well. And I think it's impressive because this film is kind of told in this like dual time. And so we're going between prior to the event and after the event kind of things, and just to watch her body language. And I mean, the film, just we'll get into the cinematography
Oh
itself
yeah.
as well, but just her performance, she has to carry this person who's like energetic and hopeful and excited and doing all these things, and then also this role of this person who's experienced this like horrible violation, and how do you like go through from that. And it's just, I think it's just really, I think her performance is exceptional in this, honestly.
Yeah, I'll agree. I don't have much to add to that other than I think this role for her came at the perfect time for me because while watching Bottoms, not Bottoms, 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 I loved it. right? And I love Bodies, Bodies,
Yeah.
Bite. I love all of her work, but something I come up against is I think she, at least to me, she comes off as like, I just want to be funny just to be funny when maybe a situation doesn't call for it, or maybe it's just like too zany for my liking, because she can definitely get zany really quick. Um,
I'd agree.
Especially in the podcast bit in Bodies, Bodies, Body. But yeah, I just love the balance, because I do think it's more about balance when we're talking about this movie, where yeah, it is a funny movie. There are jokes I
Yeah.
genuinely laughed at, and some I felt guilty about laughing about, but it felt more reserved and more like, oh yeah, somebody going through this situation would have that reaction, as opposed to, let me just be funny because I this is a comedy and I really need to be funny right now. But yeah, I so not much to add to that. Because I do think Sennott is a great actress, great actor, period. And I'm thrilled to see that I think she got a pilot just picked up by HBO, and she's going to be in Saturday Night, formerly called like not the 1975. I think it was just called like something 1975,
Is she
like
playing Gilda
SNL. Some,
Radner?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like, that feels like who she'd probably play, but yeah, I mean, she's phenomenal. Like, and yeah, I'm with you. I think she's gonna be I am very excited to watch her career.
yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to say is it's the perfect breather between like, hey, here's a dramatic role between what I can only assume are gonna be, like, just balls to the walls comedies,
Right.
especially in the case of Saturday Night Live, or Saturday I keep saying Saturday Night Live, I just Saturday night, but, I mean, they should release that on a Saturday night, but I digress. Like, maybe release an hour or 2 before Saturday Night Live that week. But, getting, to the more technical elements, actually, no. Let's see. What would you like to talk about next? The relationships, pacing, relatability, or authenticness?
Oh, let's talk about the relationships because I am always a story guy. That's always going to be like my like thing that I kind of like hone in on first whenever I'm watching a movie is if you tell me a good story, even if other elements maybe aren't as impressive, I'll probably still really like it. So, and I think the story in this is really well done. I think her friend, I think the way that they kind of interact with her, and particularly her boyfriend, partner, that
Noah.
relationship in particular, yeah, Noah, is probably one of my favorite on-screen things I've seen in a film that deals with like yeah, like a sexual assault and the trauma that kind of results from that. So, yeah, like that I just think it was just really well done because I think we just see a woman who goes into like total avoidance mode,
Yeah.
following that. And I think the way that her friends are there to like support her is interesting. I think the way that they handle that yeah, I think it's just really good. But yeah, I mean, feel free to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the friendships and how it um, portrays relationships in this movie are fascinating, right? Because you have her friends trying to be this as supportive as they realistically can without trying to enable destructive behavior. I think at one point, um, Max, Rachel Sennott's character, is talking about like online shopping and how much she's online shopping, and then one of her roommates is like, okay, but can you like help out with full rent, or I don't know if that's the joke, but it struck me as like, oh wow, they're really trying to, like I said, try to give her the space to deal with what she's dealing with without giving her an excuse to just kind of switch off from the world, would be how I put it. And as far as like relationships, like we mentioned Noah, I think he's also trying to do that without getting into spoilers, obvious. But I think, and I think it speaks to the main part of the film where I think they're trying to, or at least I think that they're trying to say that you can hold space for the people who are going through things that you don't understand, but also you really need to be on them, because there's a different part of this story where if they had these friends or family or well, I guess family isn't even brought up in the movie.
Not
Um,
particularly, yeah.
but these relationships, whether friends or relationship, they're not giving her their space to just shut down. And I think
Right.
there's a version of that story where she does shut down and retreat into herself. And I think that's something we see in real life far too often
Yeah.
is friends not knowing what to do with somebody dealing with really intense emotions that they don't know how to deal with themselves. So,
Yeah, I think that's true, is like, I don't know that her friends necessarily always do the right thing
yeah.
or say the right thing, but I think that's one of the things that actually works is they don't just not say anything then. And I think that's what makes it like really well written to me anyway. In that regard is yeah, even if this thing happens to this person that you love, there's still you even if you're going to mess up and you probably will, like engaging with them is still better than just ignoring it entirely. And I think they thread that needle really well, like with her friends. Yeah, they're and it's all a group of comedians. I mean,
Yeah.
her boyfriend, ex-boyfriend is a comedian, and her two roommates are comedians. And so you have this group of like basically four comedians. And so you like they're gonna say things that are this weird, dark kind of whatever, but they push her. They push her without like pushing too much. It's
Yeah.
always offered, "Hey, do you wanna come do a set?" Or, "Hey, do you at least wanna come to the comedy club and watch us do our thing? And maybe you can get up and try. Maybe it's time to start working again." And I think I really appreciated that about it, that there's never this just total disengagement from her and just kinda, yeah, the letting her stew. It's just really, yeah, honest in a way that I think is also instructive to people like who are watching who might know somebody who's been through something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And then jumping off of that, I think a large part of this movie is how I think how it either dies or succeeds is off of its relatability. Because I think the film really tries to weave these narrative threads of like, hey, if you can relate to this, you'll really connect to the story in a way that you weren't even expecting to. So I just want to ask really briefly, or as longly as you want to answer, were there specific moments or elements that felt relatable to you and what made them work? And how does it relate back to the message of the film?
So I think one of the most relatable scenes to me, and I hope this doesn't get too into spoiler. There's a scene where she is talking. She's a nanny for Jason Jones's character, for Cameron, and for his daughter Brooke, who's I don't know, like low high school, I think like 13, 14 kind of age is the
Mhm.
age I think. I can't remember exactly, but younger, like sub 18. But anyway, there's a scene where she goes out and Cameron is like grilling and he's a police officer and two of his like cop buddies are there with him. And she goes outside. Basically, she's just kind of like saying, "Hey, I'm going to dip. I'm heading home or whatever." And they kind of like bring her into this conversation. And it is this deeply uncomfortable kind of situation where she's there and she's significantly younger than them. Like you're probably
Mhm.
talking about a lot of people in their 40s and she's in her 20s or, upper 30s, whatever. But like she is younger and she's the only woman in this group of men and men with authority. And there's this kind of, you can see this both discomfort, but also so she diffuses that with like humor and kind of like jokey jokes with these people. And I felt like that is something, even though nothing that she goes through, I'm not a comedian, I am not like in her situation, I've never experienced what she does, but that situation right there is relatable. I think for a lot of people of like, oh, I'm the only person in this group and I am deeply uncomfortable here. And you can see, I think, that discomfort, but also just the way that she uses her discomfort and like kind of uses humor to diffuse that and kind of make it she's just one of the guys. And I think that scene in particular is just, yeah, it's really well done and it plays really well later in the film as well.
Yeah, I
So
was just
yeah,
about
like
to mention
that,
that.
yeah, I think that scene in particular is probably one of the things that I think is something that even if you haven't experienced a lot of the other themes that this film talks about, that can be relatable to a lot of viewers.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that scene specifically because it is the, I think, thesis for the movie. That's the
Yeah.
point where you decide. I think it's the jumping point where you decide if this film is for you or not. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, there are some exit points earlier on in the movie where you could be like, "Oh, I don't like the roommates. They really are irritating to me. Click off of Netflix, um,
Mhm.
or wherever you're watching it." But this is the true, like, last stop before you really get to the I believe the meat and potatoes of the film
Yeah.
where some more distressing things happen. Um, but yeah, mentioning that scene is it perfectly portrays the message of the film. Like we talked about color, and we'll talk about color here soon, and we'll talk about music later on. But at that, it's a very colorful film and a very music driven film, and you'll notice all the color drains out of the picture. Well, not all color because, can't be black and
Yeah.
white, but, and there's no music except for stuff happening way in the background. Like, it's very muffled sounds, and so, yeah, all the music and, color virtually goes out of the frame, and we're presented with a very uncomfortable situation, and not that I've ever been in that situation, but I know what it's like to feel uncomfortable. And I think the film does a really good job at just, even if it's not relatable to you, I think that's the scene is where the point where it makes it relatable is
Mhm.
okay. You may have not been in a situation where three police officers are bringing up your comedy videos or au pair or something like that, I think is
Yeah.
what she describes
Right.
herself as, instead of a nanny.
Right.
And, or any of the situations that, Brooke finds herself in. But that's the, scenario, or the scene where I think the film makes its point known, where it makes it relatable to the viewer. So while I didn't connect with a lot of what was going on, that's the point where I'm like, "Okay, now it makes sense." And I forget the director of this. I don't know why my brain is saying Aaliyah Shakwat, but because I know that's not right.
Yeah.
Not right.
Uh, I think it's Ally Pankiw.
Yeah, that's right. But that I think
Pankiw, sorry.
yeah, and I think she really does a great job of translating that to the viewer to make
Mhm.
it very plain in all the scenarios where that feeling kind of bubbles up. And I think we'll talk about that specifically when we get to cinematography and the music and other things. But I just
Yeah.
really appreciated that because there have been movies like this that I've watched that, you know, me being who I am, uh, didn't really understand because the director didn't make me understand
Mhm.
that feeling. Which another film we talked about, Barbie, did another really good job of. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it in terms of relatability, I think it makes it relatable to anyone watching. But with that said, I know we've been talking a lot about stylistic choices, so let's just go back to the like, hi cat. Yes, I know I haven't pet you in the last 2 minutes. Um, but going back to we've kind of been dancing around this. Color is used a ton in the film.
Yeah.
What did you think of the cinematography, the camera work, color palette, you name it? Like, just go off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it delineates really well between basically these 2 timelines and where you see her. Um, yeah, like, you have this in the aftermath, everything's yeah, it's really desaturated and, like, much a darker tone, kind of I think you mentioned, like, a bluish kinda tone over it, and then, yeah, like, even just the way the camera is, and I think I was reading, like, an interview with the director, and she said that she really wanted everything in the after to be just this very kind of like stasis kind of thing of like everything's very flat. So anything that's recorded where she's having like conversations with her roommates after, it's just really flat. There's not a lot of motion. And she's like, I kind of wanted to have that energy up a lot more in the before time. So you see the camera kind of swirl around and everything. I mean, not swirl around. I don't want to make it, this is not one of those, I'm going to feel sick watching it kind of things. But there's a lot more motion and like, yeah, like handheld kind of stuff versus, like placed camera. And I think, yeah, you can really feel the energy between that, even if everything was stripped out. I think you could kind of vibe it out just by literally watching the film to kind of see what's happening. And I think that's just really effective filmmaking as well.
Yeah, I think it was the first time I've really noticed the use of gels. And for those who don't know what gels are, it's like I think it's like a color you can put in front of a either a lens or a light to change the color of the light without using LED. Although I'm sure LEDs were used here because it's probably cheaper. But, it's the first time I've noticed anything like that. You mentioned in my notes I made mention of like blues and yellows and some green. It really stood out. I think going back to what you said about, like, just watching the movie, I think you could not even listen to this movie, you could hit the mute button on
Hmm.
your, TV or wherever you're watching, and I think you'd still get the same movie. You'd still understand the basic visual language or narrative of what's going on in the movie without even, like, um, needing any audio.
Hmm.
And we'll talk about audio very soon. But because I noticed a few things, but yeah, I think the cinematography is really fantastic for this, and it's not like somebody you know, but like it just I don't know, it just really stood out to me. That's like the beginning and end. It really stood out to me. The color grading was amazing. Like, there's one shot very early on in the film where it transitions from her world being very very blue, and then you see yellow light pouring in through the window, and then the whole frame turns yellow um, around her. It's fantastic color work. I don't know if
Hmm.
that's color grading or gels or LEDs, whatever that was. I'm excited to see whatever the color scientist and whatever the cinematographer does next because that was fantastic.
Yeah.
And speaking of fantastic, the playlist on this is fantastic. We've
So
got
good.
like Muna, Japanese House was the first. That was the first note I made. It's like, what was the first song?
I don't know. I just remember
Something has to
Phoebe Bridgers
change.
coming in, and I'm like, oh.
The first song was "Something Has to Change" by the Japanese House,
Right.
which if you anyone has looked at my monthly little Instagram stories I put out, they're constantly on my in my top 10 for most listened to artists. That's changed because of Sabrina Carpenter, but that's release bias. But I love this playlist. Whatever the music supervisor was doing, I absolutely loved because it was. I feel like they stole my Spotify playlist from my Spotify account and said, "Hey, we're just gonna make this music specifically for you, Austin." And all the people who love Muna, Phoebe Bridgers. I know there's some other artists like Alison Pontier um,
Hmm.
in there too, but those are just a few I noticed. What did you think about the music?
Oh no, it's fantastic, and it like I think it feels very much like the kind of like this is I do not want to sound reductive, but like if I had no, but if I'm like listening to my like sad girl playlist kind of thing, this felt very what I would have on it, Like I love it. I think it sets the tone for the film beautifully. Oh, it's so I agree. The music supervisor did an exceptional job putting this soundtrack together. It is, yeah, it's one of my I agree. It's one of my favorites from a film because I think it also tells a story. Yeah, like outside of just yeah, the actual dialogue, which I also think is quite good. Like I like all the elements, but you could take any single element, and I think it works to tell the story pretty much as well as all of them combined. Like, yeah, I think just listening to the soundtrack, you would also get a really strong sense
Yeah.
of this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and specifically calling out the first song, "Something Has to Change," which I've listened
Mhm.
to. I don't even wanna look up how many times I've listened to that. Literally, the lyrics, for, like, I think 4 or 5 lines is just the words, "Something has to change, something has to change."
Right.
It's that other aspect of storytelling, like you were saying. We talked about color telling a story, we talked about, the comedy and the relationships telling its own story. I think the music, just very plainly lays out, here is what's going on in case you are not getting the message.
Right.
And also +1 for diegetic music. I mean, there are
Right.
some
Yeah.
cases where it, like, kind of transitions into the typical, like, overblown, um, montage style, soundtrack, stuff, but most of it is diegetic,
Yeah. Yeah.
meaning in universe or in the universe of the film, it's, like, playing in the background or something.
Yeah, it does a good job of that. Yeah. No, it's great.
Yeah. Although I do question somebody having a radio in like 2020, whenever this takes place. I was like,
Right.
okay, like maybe if you have like an iPod in the corner, I'd understand that, like, or iPhone connected to like you remember the iHomes?
Yeah, there you go.
Like I would understand that, but like radio, someone in their 20s. I mean, at that point, vinyl would be more more relatable, to
There
get
you
back
go.
to that word. But, and then I know you briefly mentioned the dialogue, so let's talk about that. What did you think of the dialogue, especially when it kinda goes into the more serious or emotional topics that naturally this, film talks about?
Yeah.
Feel natural, or feel stilted, or
I mean, I think it works really well personally. I wish I was as funny as that even in my saddest days, but, for the most part, I really feel like it feels pretty realistic. It's not that, like, kind of mumblecore where you have all the ums and everything, and so it feels very realistic. It doesn't have that kind of vibe, but it does have a natural flow to it. I feel like these are conversations I could see happening
yeah,
with people. Nothing felt outside of, nobody ever talks like that kind of thing. But it doesn't go into that Wes Anderson or like Quentin Tarantino conversation where it's so snappy or really, very, very wordy and clever and all of that. It's not that. It hits a far more natural kind of dialogue. And I thought it worked. Everything felt real to me. Even with Brooke, I thought the conversations, we haven't talked a lot about Brooke, but the conversations between Sam and Brooke, I think are also, they felt real to me. Like I could see a 20 something au pair talking to her 15 something year old, kid in that way. In this, I'm older than you, but I'm also kind of relating to you as a person and understanding that you're not an adult, but you're also not a little kid. And I felt like that felt real as well.
yeah, I would have to agree. I don't have much more to add except for maybe the only time where the dialogue felt unrealistic is, and maybe it's not unrealistic, more so that I had I was kind of squirming in my seat problem. Was when the two, when uh, when Brooke and Max uh, are talking about Twilight, and to the dad, it just felt very, maybe because I wasn't like in talking about Twilight at the time, uh, but that felt very unnatural. It's like, hey, maybe don't mention this Team Jacob stuff in front of the dad. Some social context clue might have told you that maybe don't mention that, or maybe that's the point. But as we'll get into later.
Right.
But yeah, and to talk about Brooke and Max's relationship,
Max or Sam? I thought she
it's
was Sam.
Sam. It's Sam.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
Um, I don't know why I have Max in my head. Maybe because I was talking about the Deadpool and Wolverine conversation. But yeah, it felt. I don't think there was at any point where it felt unnatural, and I do think
Mm-mm.
again, like you said, Sam and Brooks relationship felt very natural, where it starts from this point of clashing with one another to what can we connect on, and then okay, how can I mentor you, and then what it ends up happening, which I won't spoil because I think it's something you need to see for yourself. See it on Netflix if you've got Netflix, or
Yeah.
just rent it. Maybe the director gets more royalties that way. I don't know. I don't know how any of that works.
I don't know.
Uh, um, and then final question before we kind of go in depth into the spoiler discussion. I want to talk about the pacing of the film, especially when we get towards that third act.
Mhm.
Um, did it work for you? Did it ever feel too rushed or anything like that?
No, I think it is. I mean, I really, really love this movie, with some exceptions to the very end, which I think we'll probably talk about in maybe the spoilery section. But no, like, I think the structure of it works really well, and it unfolds the story pretty brilliantly, I think. I really don't have any like, yeah, I think the pacing is great. There is no point where I'm watching this movie where I was like, "Oh, get on with it." Like, I didn't feel like I was looking at my watch and like, "Okay, get to the next part." It feels really, yeah, really well paced. I think um, I imagine, I don't know how much of that is the editor, how much of that is the director, but whatever they did, it works really, really well. I think I have, yeah, I think it's a pretty brilliantly put together film as far as that goes.
This will be the first point we disagree on.
Okay.
I think it suffers a really rubber band.
Hmm.
Um, the closer you get to the end of the movie, um, and not spoiling anything, there it but because of the two timelines, I think it really at least for me, it confused me a lot about
Mm.
what was happening at any given moment. Like I almost felt like I needed have you ever played like a story? Here are the choices you made, and here's how your decision changed this. I needed like a a credit sequence where it's like, here's the timeline and how each point connects to this. Because at a few points I was confused what was happening now and what was
Mm.
happening then. Like even just like a little 10 days ago or whatever, like what at like the bottom left or something would have been like, okay, cool. On top of that, I think um, the movie has this B plot with Brooke that I don't think really works for me because it's all very hand wavy. Again, no spoiler. But I don't know how much I could say, but it mentions it every few scenes and then like drops it immediately after and then brings it back up again, drops it, brings it up again, drops it. And I don't know, maybe that's how life works as you bring something up and it gets dropped, but it felt very unnatural in that way to me because there is a turning point where a character agrees to something and then a lot of the plot happens and then there's something else happens with that B plot
Yeah.
that really just kind of deteriorated the movie for me. It brought it down actually a couple stars for me because the plot got so convoluted toward as we get towards the end of the movie, and there's really not enough of a through line throughout the entire movie um, to support it being what it is at the end of the movie. I'm trying to
Mm.
be as spoiler light as possible, but yeah, I almost felt like you could cut that out of the movie and not have it affect anything. I mean, I know it's a major part of the movie, but at the same time, I'm like, you could modify that to be like, okay, well, it can be this instead, or it felt interchangeable, is I guess what I mean,
Mm,
because it wasn't very specific. I'm a sucker for if you make something specific, you've got me. But
mm,
if you make it inspecific and only just like hand wave at that general plot of what that B plot is, it doesn't really excite me.
mm.
Not that it has to be exciting,
Right.
but it just felt convoluted in some ways.
I To me, I felt like what happens with Brooke is something that is necessary for like Sam to be able to kind of move past her trauma. Is the situation that she can connect to that allows her to move to the next thing. Like she needs to have something like a project, I guess. And I think
Mhm.
anytime somebody has a major trauma, there needs at some point there's gonna you can kind of like live there forever, but at some point there can be some kind of I don't know, project or like that's the word that kind of like is in my brain right now, but like that kind of thing, like some kind of thing that you can latch onto that I'm going to do this that's kind of separate from my trauma. And this isn't really separate because we'll get into that later.
Yeah, we're
But
really dodging left and right. Spoiler.
but she needs to do this thing for Sam, I think because she needs to do this thing for herself. And so for me, that did work. I think it's maybe a little bit absurd and like some of the specifics of what happens are maybe a little, but I think overall it felt to me like the kind of thing that she could do that would allow yeah, like I said, that would allow her to move on to the next thing that she like to move on with her life basically because
Sure.
there is no moving on, but there's the okay, but now I can like function again. And I think she needed to do this thing in order to get to that next level of function. And I think so for me that worked. And I do agree like the end scene, like the third act in particular can be pretty, but I felt
Yeah.
like to me it worked. I thought it worked pretty well. Um the hardest part is there's a scene where she has this they kind of show the immediate aftermath of the horror before they showed the horror. And I feel like that can get a little bit confusing. Like
Yeah.
I tracked with it okay, but I could see that in particular because there's this immediate aftermath scene that happens and then the like scene. And like those two being flipped to me that works. I think that is right as you're like merging these two and you have that kind of like cross thing that can be confusing but to me it works but that's me so but I can see where for some that could be confusing. It reminds me kind of the musical The Last 5 Years, which I think was also turned into a movie, but it's basically these two stories that are told. One starts at the end, one starts at the beginning, and of this marriage that ends, and they kind of cross in the middle, and then end on the other side where one person's just getting into this relationship and the other is getting out of theirs. It's a beautiful musical. Like it's
I'll have to check it out.
worth looking up. Yeah. I feel like maybe Anna Hathaway did the musical version of it. I don't remember, but like it's yeah, it's a really interesting story. But yeah, it so I think anytime you're doing this kind of like crossed timeline, you're going to run into some place where that gets confusing. And so I can see that. For me it worked, but I can see where that's maybe a little much.
Yeah, it was just all very like I get which point you're talking about, and we'll talk about it a little later.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we're really butting up against that
Yeah.
spoiler
Spoiler.
territory. But yeah, I agree. It just needed, I think, a little bit more, maybe some editing to make it flow a little better. And in a dual timeline thing like this, it's like I guess the more recent example for me because I haven't seen Rashomon or what did you say the fifth year,
The Last 5 years, I believe,
the
is the
last five
title.
years. Um,
Yeah.
I guess the more recent thing is the Acolyte, is where you
Mm.
have, hey, this thing happened in the past. Now we have an entire episode devoted to telling you a thing that happened in the past that you've already kind of learned about, but from a different perspective, but which this doesn't do. But anyways, I feel like we're really bumping up against spoilers.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I think we should just go right into it. So for those listening or watching, here's a quick heads up for those who haven't seen I Used to Be Funny yet. We're about to discuss the plot and unanswered questions from the film and just about anything. Nothing's off limits. So if you prefer to avoid spoilers, you can skip ahead. I'll have a time code labeled. I don't know what it's going to be called, but it'll have some version of like final thoughts or social media plugs or outro or something like that. You'll find that in the episode description on wherever you listen to this, or on YouTube, or on my website, wherever. So just click that. You should be able to go right to it, or scrub through your episode player. I'm not sure how each podcast player handles that, but anyway. So now that the spoiler warnings there, I hope everyone's who is gone has not seen it has gone. Watch it on Netflix if you've got it, or rent it, whatever you got to do. So with that said, let's talk spoilers.
Yeah.
So there's a scene in this movie which I thought was very poignant. It's kind of another one of those thesis statements for the movie. Sam, the main character, goes into a bookstore. I'm guessing a local bookstore. It didn't look like a Barnes and Noble to me. Not that that matters, but and she picks up a book that's titled like "Moving in Circles," um, and mentions something about becoming straight lines. I think the exact quote is, here he is. The exact quote is, "We keep moving in the same circles in the same ways that neurons circle atoms. We must become straight lines." And the book title is "Tapping Back In," by author Brianne Smorton. I don't know if that's an actual book,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
but it didn't look like a real book, if I'm going to be honest. It's a very fake book looking cover. But so I want to talk about that. Did that quote resonate with you when you saw the film, either on first watch, rewatch? And how do you think it's a good thesis statement for the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's yeah, again, it's a pretty just straightforward kind of thing. Like after the assault, she's just like goes around and around. Like it's really difficult for her to, you know, move past that. There are people in her life that, you know, anytime she sees them, particularly Noah, her boyfriend and then ex-boyfriend. It's anytime she sees him, there's just this like connection to that event. And I think with her, like, yeah, in order to move past that circular kind of thing, she has to make these decisions to like who's able to like continue to be in her life, who has to be excised. And I think that's just really hard to do. And I think the film explores that really well. And it feels almost unfair. Noah didn't do anything wrong. He's wholly supportive. He's really, good to her. And I think she sees that, but there's just no, he's just a part of a thing that she can't get past, and like that's not anybody's fault. And it just, yeah, I just really appreciated the way that that it's dealt with. I think it's really difficult and poignant, as you said. I think that's a good word for it.
Yeah, it really struck out to me in a way that and I think the movie has a lot of points like this where it's like, hey, this is the point of the film, and it
Yeah, for
just kind of
sure.
shoves it in your face without being like overtly direct, but like also being
Mhm.
like, here it is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a wonderful showcase for the film about like,
Yeah.
hey, if in case you didn't get it, here's another case of like, if the cinematography, if the music didn't do it for you, here's the character literally reading from a book called Tapping Back In.
Right.
So, and I want to key in on something you said about Noah, because it's one of the more heartbreaking
It is.
scenes in the movie. There's conversation late on in the film about it's basically, for lack of a better term, a "what are we" conversation,
Yeah.
and it calls back to one of my favorite films of last year. And I don't like to compare movies. Think if you're comparing movies in your reviews, that's a very unique crutch to have. But yeah, I thought it compared to past lives a lot, where it's like, hey, we're heading in two separate directions, and really, another point where it's like, here's the thesis of the film, here's what relationships look like post trauma and post event, I guess, the more vague term for it.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, like, what do you think of that scene?
Yeah, I mean, it is sad because yeah, like I said, it's he didn't do anything wrong. Like Noah is not the problem here, and she says that. I mean, really plainly, she's like, "This isn't really about you. This is about me and about my trauma, and I can't." And I can see that there is going to be, as a person who I mean, if your partner is violated, there's going to be this feeling of, why wasn't I able to stop that? Why wasn't I able to see it ahead of time? Whether it's you're a parent and something happens to your kid, or it's a partner or whatever, there's going to be this feeling of like responsibility, that I wasn't able to make this not happen, that then kind of turns it into a story about you, and it's not, and she cannot be there as she's dealing with her own thing to help him process his feelings about not being able to stop it, or not, being able to be everything for her in the aftermath of this assault. And like, I think it's just this really difficult thing, and I think it's written really beautifully in a way that I never felt like either of them is the bad guy. And I
Yeah.
think they do that really well. I think that the script really does that well. And yeah, I think it's not a comparison that like came to my mind with past lives, but I could totally see that when they're doing their like Zoom calls, and she kind of is like, no, not now. But I think that it does have that same kind of vibe of like, neither person's wrong. It's just, this can't work for this time.
Yeah, it's a mutual understanding of, like, hey, I tried to be there for you, but I couldn't deal with this thing that you were dealing with while also dealing with my thing.
Right.
So yeah, I think that puts it beautifully. So yeah, going further, I know we're talking, we kind of um, have been dancing around the whole idea of trauma, this whole
Mhm.
podcast. So let's just address it. How do you think the film portrays it? It is particularly the complexity of this type of trauma. Do you think it's um,
Yeah.
real, especially Sam's journey throughout all of it, or does it oversimplify things?
I mean, anytime you're looking at a film, there's going to be a level of simplification, just for portraying the story. But I feel like overall, it does a really solid job. Um, yeah, I love that she doesn't show the actual assault. I think that is really great. Like, I think one of the first movies I ever saw that dealt specifically with like sexual assault was The Accused, with Jodie Foster, way back,
Mm.
like a 1980s movie. I saw that in college, and it is brutal and like almost fetishizes the actual like assault itself. It's a really incredibly difficult film to watch. I mean, it's an important movie, but I think it's really hard. And this one, she doesn't show anything. I mean, it's not like that, but you sure know what happens. And I think that is done really well. And I think that she did a really great job of like showing the aftermath of like how this shuts down. And like, there are parts where she just says it out loud to Brooke. There's like a scene where she's just like, I can't be funny anymore. All I think about is this event. It just consumes me. I can't work. I can't talk to my friends. I can't be with my boyfriend anymore. Like, everything is impacted by this.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in a time, and here's somebody who has some kind of online presence. She has a YouTube channel that has, and they talk about it specifically. She has like lots of views on her stuff. And then her story, a cop raped her, and she is that's obviously going to be in the news. And then it's a situation where she actually went and like did the thing. And I mean, we rarely know about these assaults unless there is a court case, and then we know everything. And like, so you have this young girl whose mom died, and then her dad is out of the picture now. He's in jail because he's sentenced, and like she lashes out at this person who she sees as maybe doing this for like for clout, for for the views. And like,
Yeah.
and I could see that settling in the mind of somebody who's a lot of their life is on, TikTok or social media or whatever, where, yeah, the whole deal is to get likes, to get clicks. And to see this situation happen to your family and be like, well, the only reason that you're doing this is for the likes, it's for the clout. And to have to like tell a kid, no, this ruined my life. This ruined everything. So yeah, it's said overtly, which, maybe a lot of people never vocalize, but I think the way that they did that was done really well. Of they were able to vocalize it in a way that made sense without it just being expository. This is how it feels to experience trauma. Like, I think
Yeah.
they did that really well. I think that the script handled that aspect well.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it gets overly simplified towards the end
Mhm.
of the film, like that scene you talked about where it's just hitting you in the face with, "No, Brooke, here's what's happened." I think it does get a little like, okay, that's a little simplification of oversimplification of things, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you talked about, Brooke is of a different generation, so maybe she just needs that like hard truth.
Mhm.
Um, but to go back to something you said earlier, the fetishization of trauma, I think that's something that really rubbed me the wrong way with a lot of FX shows,
Mhm.
particularly it was from a few years ago, a teacher or something like that with an um, I forget the kid's name from Love Simon, but uh, with Kate Mara, it was on FX. They really go in that direction, and I'm glad this movie doesn't go in that direction because
Yeah.
I think it's trusting the audience to know what happened.
Yeah.
Because they've already shown you earlier. It's like you're kind of out of sorts when you hear that about the aftermath earlier on in the film, and you're like, "Oh, carbon monoxide detectors. What is she talking about?" They're
Yeah.
you're in Brooke's frame of mind. So when it reframes it from Sam's frame of mind, it's very plain, but not in a but in a complex way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, it's it, and I think showing the court scene, while I think at some points it does trend towards, not, I don't want to say power fantasy because I don't think that's the right term to use here, but it does trend towards like, I don't know if that would happen in this situation, but like it's not trying to be a courtroom drama.
Right. Yeah.
It's just trying to say, okay, here's how she would react to this situation, even if 100% the judge would like uh sentence her from some of the things she says in the movie, but that's beside the point. Like, just anyways, that's getting beside the point. But I think it's very complex. It's very, the word that came into my mind in the first 5 minutes before I even knew of any of the trauma that she was going through. Like, I knew that there was trauma going on there, but you don't know what it is until very late into the film. I think about midway, the term in my mind comes across as humanistic.
Mhm.
It's very human when it comes to the trauma. It doesn't try to say, we talked about fetishization, which is apparently a very hard word for me to say. I'm learning, which is okay with me. But it could have leaned into that and really just
Mhm.
lost the thread, and maybe even turned into like a romantic dramedy between her and Noah, or
Yeah.
really tried to go south instead of left instead of right. but I'm glad it went the way it did, for lack of a better phrase, um,
Yeah.
narratively. But speaking of where it went, I just want to spend the rest of our time talking about Act 3 because
Okay. Yeah.
it's what really kind of turned me off of the movie. It was a real
Mm.
disconnect from the rest of the movie for me. The film takes a noticeable tonal shift with the rescue storyline, for lack of a better term. How do you think this affected the overall mood of the film? And do you think it adds or detracts from uh, the film as a whole?
Yeah. So if you're watching, I'm going to assume that you've seen it, but just to like set it up, if somebody decides they don't care about spoilers. So basically at the end, Brooke, the film honestly starts with Brooke is this missing person that,
Yeah,
and we don't really know what her relationship to Brooke is. We know that Brooke is very pissed at Sam. Like she is angry. And that they've had an interaction at some point in this like 4-day time in which Brooke has been missing. They have actually seen each other somewhere in the middle of that 4-day time that the news is saying she's been out of pocket. And so and I think the way they kind of like get to that is again like pretty well done. But like you have this kid and I feel like the hardest thing, so she runs away basically and she goes with this like bad boyfriend kind of person, much older person, to Niagara Falls to and he's like, I don't know, a drug dealer or something, whatever.
yeah,
And I feel like that's the thing, is I think that overall I don't like hate it. I think it kind of works in that, yeah, you have these whatever. I wish they had set up Brooke a little better as
yeah,
having these unsavory like ties that maybe Sam is keeping her from. And I don't feel like that is set up. So that to me is the hardest sell of it. But I think Sam's need to go rescue Brooke from this person does work because I think that Sam, like I said earlier, I think Sam needs this thing to do, this, you know, rescue to be able to move on to the next thing of what she's going to do. So, like, thematically, I think it works. I think story wise, it's maybe forced. That would be my take on it. So it worked for me overall. But yeah, I do think that if there's any weakness in the script, that's probably it. Is I think if we had had more understanding that Brooke had bad friends or the potential for bad friends, but Sam kind of steered her away from that. And then when Sam is out of her life because Brooke's dad raped her, you know, like that made her go toward this way. I feel like that could have made that easier, but
yeah.
overall I still thought it worked personally.
I agree with everything you're saying because we only get one scene really where uh, Brooke, apparently I'm really struggling with names today, is hanging out with, I think that was Nathan earlier in like
Maybe.
maybe. It's not really clear because we don't hear his name until like
Hmm.
much later in the film. So it's like, okay. And they make a point to talk about the person providing the Smirnoff, but like, and they mention her by name, but like, that's it. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, oh, if this is the one thing that wouldn't really spell out to me that as a viewer that, oh, she's in Niagara Falls with a drug dealer boyfriend and is getting high off of his supply, quite literally. Like I think I it doesn't say it explicitly, but it basically says that Nathan's been forced drinking, like putting some meth or something like that.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Anyway, but I think, yeah, I think some tweaking there would have really been um, useful. And because it's like Sam is at this party and then just, I guess, looks at the Nathan name tag, I think, and
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
and then just basically it cuts and then, oh hey, here's some food and here's my car, and it's like, okay, I don't know if you're the same friends that were trying to not enforce her bad behavior. Like you're the little one telling her to let the Brooke things go, and now you're fine with it. It was weird.
Yeah.
absent of, I don't like saying what a movie, but this isn't an actual review. So um I would have preferred, because this was coming up in my mind while watching the third act, I would have preferred that she goes to Niagara Falls and it's not Brooke.
Mm.
The person she thought was Brooke that came to her house that day maybe like was somebody else, and that maybe have a B plot where it's more about like, okay, has she imagined something in her mind so that she can have a purpose again? That would have been really strong, a strong way to end the movie. It would have been a downer
Yeah.
of a way to end the movie. And I think the movie very clearly wants to have that um uh happy ending, but I think this film would have worked better with that downer ending where it's like, no,
Mm.
she just imagined that. I mean, I don't know, like there would be some mental gymnastics to make it to where it's not Brooke, and maybe it brings up some negative connotations it where it'd be a commentary on like believability of like trauma survivors' stories changing, and I don't think that would have been great. So I don't know.
Yeah, that would be my main thought there is like, I don't want to veer too much into like, oh, well, she's just crazy lady, and it feels like that could be the way that might be perceived. And I think that would undercut a larger theme of overcoming or moving through your trauma. So that personally, like I said, I think structurally, story wise, it could have gone differently, but I didn't hate the way it went personally. So, but I can see where you're saying, but I don't know. Also, I love the ending. I think it is entertaining, and yeah, I liked it. The
I,
very very last scene, I loved. So,
so I guess let's talk about that. Let's talk about Niagara Falls. It's a
yeah.
major setting toward the end of the film. Symbology is a very big part of this movie. So uh, I want to know, what do you think it symbolizes in the context of Sam's journey, and how does that trip to Niagara Falls impact both Sam and
I
Brooke?
mean, I don't know that we really get to see a lot of how it impacts Brooke outside of seeing a woman support her and come to her rescue and knowing that that is a thing that can still happen.
Mm,
And I think that is a positive message. But yeah, like the scene, I mean, I think just like the falls constantly going is it just keeps going. The trauma keeps going, but also your life is going to keep going, and you have to make these decisions as to how you're going to, yeah, move forward. And that the last scene is her on stage saying, I'm going to tell jokes about rape tonight. I mean,
yeah,
it's this interesting kind of thing. I think that's how particular, and that's where it gets back into specifics. I think that's how a lot of like comedians process their trauma. I mean, I look at somebody like Tig Notaro, who went through, like, as a real person,
mhm,
went through the loss of her mom, and like going through C. diff and going through breast cancer and all of these things, like deeply traumatic, horrible things. And like that's her act. And like I just think that, yeah, so like I think Rachel Sennott doing that uh, feels authentic to her as a comedian. Like it felt like, oh, well, if that was her actual life, that's probably what would happen.
yeah,
And I thought that was really well done. And I mean, I just love hearing the I know the end at the end of
mm,
the film. Like, I mean, I love that piece. That's one of my favorite just pieces of music. I think it was in probably my like top 10 last year. Yeah, I mean, Phoebe Bridgers.
mm.
Yeah, but I think that kind of hits that same thing. Yeah. So I don't know. I really dug it.
Yeah. So I have a very different take on what it meant.
Right.
I think, and this is going to sound cheesy, so don't roll your, well, you can roll your eyes if you want. Um,
I
I
don't have a
think
great eye roll, so
I do. Um, but I think the Niagara Falls were what I would call a release point for her trauma. It's like,
Mm,
okay, I have achieved the point of the trauma where I can accept what happened to me and now move on to the next phase of my life, whatever that looks like. And the reason I said that's corny is because the Niagara Falls are literally like a release point. But yeah, that's yeah. As far as the other stuff, gosh, I don't really have a lot to add to what you said. You pretty much summed up what I thought about the film. I think we were pretty a similar accord on this film. But yeah, I would love to see what this director does next. Um,
me too. I believe this was her like first feature.
and it was interesting because there was a large gap between the three release points of this movie. Now I've got release points in my head because I think it debuted at South by Southwest 2022 or 2023,
Yeah, I
and
think
then
23. Yeah.
came out this June
Hmm.
in theaters, and now it's on Netflix. So it's like, geez, that's pretty large window. Now, granted, um, something like Butterfly in the Sky was at like Tribeca 2022 and just now hit Netflix this year. So there's been wider ones, um, but yeah, I liked this film. I don't want to say I love the film. I love what it was trying to do, but I
Mm,
think the third act really is where it starts to like take all the goodwill it had and just crumble apart at the seams. It took, I think, what would be a potential 5 star into like a 3.5 or 4 star because it really just kind of lost its way for me at that point in the
mm.
third act. What would you rate it?
Oh, I'm pretty sure I gave it 4.5. I really, like, literally, my save for 5 was I felt like, yeah, the story was not quite strong enough to support the rescue, but past that, I think I think it does what it intends to do very effectively. So, yeah. I quite love this movie. It's one that would not surprise me for it to be on a top 10 at the end of the year. At the very least, it'll get an honorable mention for sure. So, but
Yeah,
we're not quite into the end of the year, so we'll see.
this is definitely going into my like directorial debut shortlist for the year
Yeah, it's
for
yeah,
our IFCA awards that we're
exactly.
gearing up for, which
Woo.
feels so soon, but also
Right? Like, didn't we
so
just do
far
that?
away. Yeah, we did them in February, so and um, we're in the recruitment stages again. So
Yeah.
I can't remember if we're closed on that, but I think ifccritics.wordpress.com, I believe is our URL. I'll include it in the URL. So if you're a critic, you've seen 50
Yeah.
movies this year, I'd encourage you to apply, especially um, if I look, I really would appreciate some unique voices this year. I think we could really get some unique voices out there. If you come from the US, I hate to say this, I'd actually discourage you from applying because I think we need more international critics.
It's
As our name implies, International Film Society Critics Association. So I want to see more international critics come by and say, hey, what's up? Well, not hey, what's up, but I'd love to hear your voice. So ifsccritics.wordpress.com. I'll have all that in the episode description on YouTube, wherever you listen to it, or watch it on YouTube. I also think you could watch on Spotify. I don't know how that works. Anyways, but um, if you have anything you'd like to discuss about I Used to Be Funny, I'd love to hear your thoughts on my Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, or Letterboxd. I'm under the username Austin B Media. I have my own Discord, which I have linked in the episode description. Whether I just opened up Patreon community chats, so well, not just, but they added this feature called all member chats. So regardless if you join my Patreon for free or become a paid member, you can participate in those chats. And I usually link stuff. I've got like a Q&A corner. I've got a little recommendations corner. got 3 or 4 of those that love for you to take part in. But with um, if you'd like to hear the next episode before it goes live on podcast services, just check out the Patreon at patreon.com/austinbeatmedia. $3 a month gets you a lot. It gets you early access to stuff like this, any editorial stuff, really, whether it be reviews, interviews, podcast episodes. And then if you upgrade to $10 a month, you get unedited podcast episodes as well as exclusive podcast episodes. And you can also I'll be opening up. I just got access to the ability to sell post and collection. So, I'll be selling various post and collections. So even if you're not a patron, you can still buy those and have access for as long as you have a Patreon account. I think I don't know exactly how that works, but if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a rating, review it on your favorite podcast app like Pocket Cast, Apple Podcast. I think Spotify podcast, you can rate podcasts now. Thank you, Alise, for joining me and discussing I Used to Be Funny. Where can people follow you on social media?
I'm just about everywhere at Alise Chaffins. I'm most active on TikTok and Instagram because I'm old Facebook. So those are the best places to find me. I'm on Threads and other places, but my usage in other I have limited abilities to interact in places. So yeah, like yeah, that's Instagram. But anywhere you can follow me there, and be sure to check out my book, The Ted Lasso Relationship Guide. Yeah.
Very good. But yeah, if you ever get on Threads again, just join us Delulu people on Thread. But with that, I have been your host, Austin Belzer, and until the next episode.